Hello, everyone. Hopefully, I'm having some tech problems, so hopefully my camera keeps working, but at least my presentation should stand up. So thank you very much, Michael, for the great intro. Yes, I am Chris Kranz. I do work for the commercial side of Sysdig, but I am going to start by talking to you about the open source stuff, which is Falco. So Falco, just to, again. To be honest, Falco came from Sysdig initially. Sysdig developed it a while ago and then was gifted to, or CNCF adopted it, I think in late 2018. If you're interested in the background to Sysdig and Falco, our founder, Loris Dejwani, was very, very smart chap, and he was kind of Wireshark fame. So he was one of the co-creators of Wireshark. So you get to have a bit of an understanding about some of the thought processes in Falco and in Sysdig, some of our open source tools as well, based on that, on his background. But I'm going to jump into Falco. So Falco kind of, let's start by talking security. There's kind of two sides to security. You've got the prevention side, as all those things we know and love, like firewalls. You want to block those packets coming in. You want to block those activities. And then there's detection. Sometimes you don't know that you want to be blocking stuff. Sometimes you don't know that certain behavior is bad. Obviously, you need a combination of the both of them. That's why we have things like Splunk, and we also have things like firewalls. Moving this into kind of giving you some context to this, on the enforcement side over at, in Linux, in Kubernetes, in Cloud Native, you've got Linux tools like SecComp, SE Linux, AppArmor, all these things we like to disable because we can't install products when they're enabled. And then common things like IP tables and obviously Kubernetes, service meshes and security rules there. On the auditing side of things, it's where it's a little bit lighter. We've got things like Audit D on the Linux side, Kubernetes audit logs, relatively new, but you still need to figure something to do with them. And of course, Falco, which is what I'm going to talk about today. So runtime security. This is my dog. She's sat down next to me at the moment, fast asleep. She's sometimes a good dog. Sometimes she just sits there and sleeps all day. But take the security of my house. I have locks on my front door. I have locks on my windows. I have an alarm. I've got cameras on there. Gives me a good amount of peace of mind. However, I've also got a teenage son, and sometimes he walks out the house and leaves the front door wide open. Or sometimes I'm just forgetful and leave things open. So I'm very glad I've got a German Shepherd, Jabba the Mutt, if you're interested in a name. I'm very happy to have a German Shepherd who is not just a good companion, but also keeps an eye on things. She tells me if there's someone walking around in the garden that she doesn't know. And she will certainly tell me if someone enters the house without permission. So that's kind of my analogy for what Falco's doing. I'm still going to have my firewalls. I'm still going to have my security controls. I'm still going to be blocking stuff. But I still want a German Shepherd to alert me when something anomalous is happening, something that I don't expect to happen happens. So where do we start with this? First of all, we start with system calls. What is a system call if you're not aware? System call, taking out the Linux manual pages, it's the fundamental interface between an application and the Linux kernel. Everything you do from an application side of things has to initiate a system call to be able to talk to the network, the file system, whatever that is. So what does this look like for us? You've got your applications up top. Hopefully you can see my mouse. You've got your applications up top. If you've got something like Kubernetes in here, you don't have to. So we talk a lot about Kubernetes, but actually Falco isn't unique to just attacking Kubernetes. The one thing that Kubernetes is nice at is it forces us to have metadata and control around the applications. So I know that a particular container belongs to this namespace, it's got this name, and it should do these types of things. So Kubernetes gives us that nice structure. Outside of that, you can still do these same things, but you don't have that metadata. It's just a server with a LAMP stack. So I don't know what part of Apache or MySQL is doing what. I don't have that additional metadata. So from those system calls, we're going to see everything that's going on. It gives us that lowest level of visibility. We're not putting in things like sidecar containers. We're not putting in, we're not injecting code into there. So we leave the applications as is. We're just analyzing things at the low level. This is also one of the reasons we do things that's just detection. We don't want to inject anything with prevention, because being that low level, looking at the kernel, you've got potentially a significant performance overhead. So what you don't want to do is then inject a decision tree that is going to give you an additional overhead to processing every single. Apologies, my camera keeps going out. Hopefully it comes back eventually. So how do we instrument these? There's kind of two methods we'd use on this. We've either used a kernel module, which is something that again came from Sysdig Labs and is now as part of the CNCF as well, or we use eBPF. If you're not aware of eBPF, it's one of the topics we're going to talk about on tomorrow's podcast along with Liz Rice. The idea of eBPF is a kind of a kernel safe way of having modules directly into the kernel. So it's different from a module, a kernel module, because kernel modules take a lot of effort. They take quite a lot of effort to design, build, get embedded into the kernel. The eBPF gives you a much more lightweight way of writing these applications, and is also is done in a safe way. So you don't have access to every single function you can do. They're supposed to be crash safe. Obviously, there's occasionally bugs in eBPF itself, but generally they're supposed to be crash safe, and they're designed to be very, very lightweight. So they give us access to tapping into the system call information without you having to trust an external kernel module. Maybe making sure you're on the right version of the kernel. We've all been through those dramas of installing something. So eBPF gives you a much more transportable way of doing this. And the idea here is bridging between that kernel space and that user space so that we can take those low-level system calls and present them up to the user without making the user have kind of high level of privileges, without having the overhead of the kernel speed up into the user side. So this is what we're doing here with eBPF maps or over on the kernel module with the delivering buffer. And then you've got these libraries on top, which kind of inspect that traffic, make decisions on this before finally going to Falco for the actual rules engine, which I'll touch on in a sec. So that's the system call inputs, but there's multiple inputs we can take into Falco. We've also got Kubernetes, and here we're dealing with the Kubernetes audit logs. So I'm not going to read the full description here. The Kubernetes audit API, kind of in a similar way that system calls give us access to every single activity that's happening to a Linux host. The Kubernetes audit log give us access to information about everything that's happening in Kubernetes. Whatever that is, if that's internal to the control plane, if that's a user access, if that's someone running a kubectl command, if that's an application requesting scale up, scale down, all of that stuff goes via the Kubernetes API. So we get a log record out of that and it feeds into Falco, and then you can start doing kind of inspection on those sort of activities. So for example, you could check to see, okay, this particular config map attached to a deployment has got a clear text password. Or someone is trying to spin up a new node port, so a network load balancer rule that doesn't have TLS enabled. So you've got that kind of security control and configurations there. And then finally, something kind of new that came to the Falco community was being able to pull in cloud logs. And I think we're all security professionals. Probably most of you know about AWS CloudTrail. There's Google's audit logs, and we're going to be adding Azure to this as well. So the idea here is to be able to take those CloudTrail logs, very similar to that Kubernetes audit API. Every single admin activity or control plane activity within AWS or Google or any cloud is going to get fed through as an event, and we can then start interpreting that. So again, that similar sort of design here, where I can see whatever activity is going on, we're going to see that as an event coming in. So similar sort of activities. I can see someone has spun up an S3 bucket but presented it to the internet. Someone's removed encryption from one of my RDS databases. Someone's created a new IAM role that's got root privileges. You can also do locational stuff. So all of my instances are in Europe. And suddenly I see a bunch of instances being spun up in Sao Paulo or America or a different region that I don't normally use. So this is where we start kind of tapping into that and start looking for anomalous patterns and anomalous activity. So these are kind of the three data feeds we've got into the Falco engine. Now, obviously, if you're running Kubernetes, what we would do is install it as a daemon set. If you're running in a cloud environment, you just need one Falco instance that can take that data feed, or you'd connect Falco into that data feed. So the overall architecture, as we touched on before, so we've got the Falco probe or eBPF module, which is feeding up the system calls. We've also run a lightweight web server, which receives these audit logs and this audit metadata from either Kubernetes or the CloudTrail stuff. We are looking at making this as extensible as possible. So because this is just kind of an activity API, in theory, you can throw any structured activity logs to it. I do say structured on purpose because it's not going to accept syslogs. It needs to be kind of in a more structured, like JSON style format. From there, you then have the filter expression, which takes the Falco rules, which I'll touch on in a second, feeds them into there and allows you to make those decisions. Falco is purely a detection engine, as I keep saying. So all you're going to get output from this is some sort of alert. So one of your rules has been triggered, and you'll get an output for that. There are various things to output. One of the things that I will hopefully demo to you is the Falco Sidekick. But you can do things just putting it out to file or to send it out and then picking it up and putting it into your workflows. I'll talk about why Sidekick is probably a more easier method of doing that. Falco rules are in YAML. Let me just switch across. Actually, I'm going to go down. So switch across to Falco rules here. Give you an example of what the Falco rules look like. Zoom in a little bit more. So this is one of my favorite rules, which is terminal shell in the container. We know that someone shouldn't be SSHing or doing kubeexec into our containers. It's an anti-pattern we want to encourage out. There are a bunch of macros and lists behind this. So we can see here we've got a kind of a fail-safe here. So we've got a never true. So this is a placeholder for you to say, okay, these particular containers, these are my jump hosts or whatever it is. So these are ones I want to exclude from that pattern. We're looking at simply a spawn process within a container. And it's got shell proc. So this is a list of different shell processes like shell, bash, KSH, so on. We want to make sure it's an interactive shell. So it's not something like an application being forked. It's not a cron job, something like that. And then we're going to trigger this alert. And then we'll trigger it with this output. So this output will feed into standard out. It will feed into your Splunk, wherever you want to feed that into. I've got a little 2-year-old outside the door shouting at me. I'm not sure if you can hear that, but the rules are, there's a whole bunch of rules that are embedded in the Falco as it is. So you'll get access to these. There's about, I'm not checked actually on the new rule set, but it used to be about 60 rules out of the box. We've added some cloud security rules into that. So there's about 160 new cloud security rules covering Amazon, Google, et cetera, et cetera. There is a whole library here, so you can check on different applications. If you've got something specific you want to look for, on the flip side to that, if you want to contribute into this as well. Looks like I'm getting a visitor. So, yes, baby.
I would have to read.
You'd have to go speak to mummy. So you're going to have to come and quickly say hello, so everyone knows that you're here and I'm not lying. And then you're going to have to go find mummy, okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Go on, go find mummy.
No.
No? I'm going to try bribe him.
Yeah. What is that?
It's, whoops, treats. Right, go tell these to mummy. Bribery always works. So various ways of installing Falco. You can install this as a directly as a service. This is generally the more secure way of doing things. If you do run things as a within Kubernetes, you are potentially exposed to the multi-tenancy side of things. Yes, you can eat them. You're potentially exposed to multi-tenancy exposure on that, on whether if there's an exploit within the control plane of that. You can obviously also install it. The triple hashes here is a blog post on why you shouldn't do curl sudo bash. Again, this is a security meetup. Most of us will be aware of that. Don't touch the fan. Yeah, and the other way of doing things is then installing things natively in Kubernetes, which is what I'll do in a demo, which is what I've done in the demo at the moment. Go find mama.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. There are also various other integrations into this, so it's not just about Falco. We can also look at Falco operator as an install mechanism, Falco cuddle as a way of controlling and managing it, Falco Sidekick, which I will touch on, as a Go and Python client, as a Kubernetes response engine. Kubernetes response engine is a useful way of taking the output and taking some activity to that, which I'll explain. In theory, I'll explain in a second. You go open the door then, go that way. And then there's a Prometheus exporter, which allows you to kind of visualize the number of events and stuff going on. Falco Sidekick. So we've got all this simple way of outputting an event within Falco, and it doesn't make sense to take something quite streamlined like Falco and add loads and loads and loads of extensions to it. So what we've got, a chap called Thomas, I always forget Thomas's last name, but Thomas contributed this to the community, and it's a Sidekick. So it sits next to Falco, and it feeds off that event stream, those events and activities that come out of Falco, and then allows you to extend this into various other methods, you know, whether you're pushing a message out to Slack, sticking it into something like Datadog, or some other workflow. This is always being added to and always being extended, so it's a great way of making it extended. You can't have more sweets. Go speak to Mama. Has Mama got dinner for you? No. Go and check.
I want to have more fish.
Let me see if I can do a demo while also having a toddler on me. So as you can see, come on then, sit up here. As you can see here, I've got a Kubernetes cluster running.
I want to have some.
Go on then, eat. You can see I've got a Kubernetes cluster running here. With I've got it's not much to it. I've got Falco running in here, and then what I've also got is, if you have seen this before, just switch back to my page, this one. If you've seen Kubernetes Goat, it's a really, really useful tool for having a intentionally vulnerable cluster. So there's a whole bunch of stuff in here that is designed to be broken, so you can kind of test your workflows and stuff. So hats off to Madua for putting this together for the community. It is fully open source. I'll put a link to this later on as well. So I've got that running in the background to give me an access to a couple of those things. If I switch across to window 2, you can see I was testing it earlier, and this is kind of the raw logs you get. You know, they are structured, and you can see they're in kind of a JSON output format. So I can take these and ingest them into something else if I want to. But at this point, they're not particularly interesting. So the other thing I've got here is Falco Sidekick running there. So Falco Sidekick is picking up on that activity and then visualizing it for me. You can see I'm doing some testing earlier, so you can see all the different activities that are running here and the different timelines of that. So what I'm going to do is just show you a potential exploit that we can do. So I'm going to switch across to my bash script. Go on and have another one. Help yourself. I'll get in trouble with the wife later when he's not going to eat his dinner. But so if we have a look at Docker PS, you can see that as a user, I haven't got permissions to do that. I can also see if I go var lib, I'm also writing this one-handed so I don't knock him off the side of my chair. Var lib kubelets, just so I can see what's in there. Again, I haven't got permissions. Yes, exactly. If I have a look, again, if I go back to here, what I'm looking for is, this is a system monitor. So a lot of monitoring tools, a lot of tools you'll deploy in Kubernetes are deployed with root privileges. Are you seeing your stuff? Are you waving at yourself? Yeah. They're deployed as with root privileges, with escalated privileges on this, which you don't always want, but actually sometimes you do need. So what we're going to do here is show how we can potentially exploit that. So I am just going to copy this command from my background. What I'm doing here is a kubectl exec. So I'm execing into this pod, running the shell scripts to get access to that. So you can see now I'm logged in as root. The reason I'm logged in as root is because I've got the context of the container user. So it's not because I've escalated privileges. I'm actually in the context of this one container now. If I switch back across to my view here, I can see Falco has generated terminal shell in the container as an alert to see that I've done something here. Now I'm going to switch back to my demo. If I have a look at the root file system, and then I'm actually going to have a look in host, sorry, not home, host. So because this is mounted as a privileged container, I've also got access to the root file system. Go on, have another one. Yep, have another one. So what I can then do is actually chroot into that host file system. So what I'm doing here is actually breaking out of that container. And what I can do now, if I go back and do Docker PS, second to run. That's a lot. That is a lot, yes. You can see now I've got access to Docker, which I didn't have from the context of within my outside of the container. I got into my container, leveraged the root privilege, the escalated privilege, broke out of that container, and then was able to run Docker commands. There is a big camera, and that was not working. And again, I can check. Okay, I can look into var lib kubelet because I'm doing this as root. And then again, back over to Kubernetes, and I can see that I was actually executing Docker client within the container. So although I was breaking out of that container, I was breaking out of that container into the file system, but I was doing that from the context within the container. So hopefully that made sense what I was going through there. So fairly, we talk about the woes of running privileged containers, privileged workloads that you shouldn't be doing. And this is kind of the use case here, showing through the different stages. So I'll get the default alert of executing a terminal shell in the container, which clearly you don't want to be encouraging. And then also running things like Docker client, Kubernetes client, any of those. If I was to run the other use case I've got here is running.
Daddy.
Okay.
Daddy's was running.
Daddy's was running. Okay. So this is just running a system audit. So again, a bunch of potentially undesirable activity here. Whoops, I pressed the wrong button there. And again, if I switch across to here, you'll see I'm running a bunch of commands here that are triggering different activities, clearing log activity, launching network tools. That's not a Pokemon, that's the Go icon from Falco Sidekick. It does look like a Pokemon though. Reads sensitive files areas, all these different activities. These are triggering. These are triggering from the default rules. So these are just the built-in rules to Falco. Obviously, you can customize these. You can make them your own. They're very, very customizable from there. And that was probably the most fun demo I've done. I've not done a demo with a 2-year-old on my laptop.
Happy.
So what we can do from the response engine is pick up on those activities. I don't have a demo for this one, I'm afraid, but what I can do is I can pick up on that activity and then execute an action. So let's say I've got that terminal shell in the container. What I can do is I can issue. Yeah, Jabba's going off now. Mama's here. You're in trouble now. So what we can do is take that event coming out of terminal shell in the container, for example, feed it into the Kubernetes engine and trigger off a killing of that pod, killing of that container. The idea there is if you've got, in DMZ, in your production environment, you really don't want to be encouraging people from shelling into a container. It could be something more critical based on the alerts. The idea here is the event handler can push things in different directions. You've got, as you might have seen from the UI, is I've actually got different severities, different priorities on these policies. So I could say, okay, you know what, for critical severities, I want to go and kill that container. For non-critical ones, I just want to send a notification to Slack or to Splunk or whatever. Or you can do both things. So I can send a notification and I can kill the container. The idea of the response engine there. You can also plug this into wider workflows. So you can, using a bunch of open source products, you can build a full SIM. A full SIM from the Falco context, obviously not a full enterprise SIM, although you can build an enterprise SIM with ELK, as you know. Yeah, fairly straightforward. You could do this natively within Falco without using the Sidekick, because FluentD can pick up on the logs directly from standard out from the container. Or again, you can plug it in through Sidekick to have multiple streams of where those events and activities go. And this is the kind of thing it could look like. Kind of similar-ish to what you saw in the UI from Falco Sidekick, but much more control here because you've got much more flexibility in the reporting and the different displays in this. Whole bunch of resources. I will dump these out as a PDF and share it with the team, so you get access to all these links and stuff. There's a lot of content in here, so I'll share the whole slide deck. Multiple ways of contributing to the project as well. You do not have to be a C programmer and a kernel developer to contribute into this. The rules are a great place to start. The rules engines, we have a lot of contributions from the community around the rules engine. There's also additional integrations for Sidekick, for Falco Sidekick. These are they're not non-trivial, but they're fairly straightforward things to contribute towards. You can just validate existing rules, create your own customizations of them. Really, really useful. Obviously, everyone's going to benefit from those rules as well. As ever, any open source project, documentation and website help is always very welcome. Switching gears into Sysdig Secure. So this is now our commercial platform. So I'm going to talk about how this kind of plugs in. So we do still leverage the Falco engine. It's kind of core to what we call our runtime security. So the runtime security, all the things I just talked about from Falco perspective are available within here, with some addition in terms of being able to apply those policies a little bit easier. So I've got centralized control of pushing those policies out and saying, actually, this policy applies to this particular namespace, or this particular policy applies to this entire cluster or this entire cloud. And there's also that response engine I talked about that's kind of embedded into Sysdig as well. So that core engine is kind of what we build off of. This slide builds, and I didn't realize that didn't build up properly. On top of that, we then build in things like image scanning, cloud compliance, enterprise runtime security is the Falco piece, and incident response. The incident response piece is something that I love, and it's an interesting one because I don't see many people actually using it, and maybe it's because I do a terrible job of explaining it. But think about when you've got Wireshark, what you'll do is you'll use your the PCAP drivers to take a capture of all the network traffic for a period of time. So the incident response stuff we've got here is very similar. What I can do is I can take a capture of all, not all, but the system call activity for a period of time. So I can go back and analyze that. That system call activity includes network traffic, includes file activity, includes system calls, obviously, includes what else does it include? Includes user commands and so on and so forth. So it's really powerful from an auditing perspective. Within the Sysdig platform, what we can do is effectively, we have got a ring buffer in the agent, so which encapsulates the Falco engine. So when we see one of these events being triggered, what you can do is say, actually, give me 10 seconds before that event happened. Dump that, as well as a period afterwards if you didn't kill the container. Dump that to disk and save it off box, save it in the database. So I can then go back and replay what actually happened during that event. I think it's really powerful for incident response. We've just started getting involved in, some of our customers are getting involved in kind of the incident response side of security. I think a lot of people, when they come to Kubernetes and cloud security, you start with detection and defense, and then eventually you get into incident response and forensics. And that's the bit where we're starting to have some really interesting conversations around that. I'd love to hear other people's kind of views on this. If anyone's ever played with this and everyone's investigated into it, that piece, the captures, as we call them, is also available as open source. What we do in the commercial tool is give you this ring buffer so you can take it back in time. In the open source world, we do just have, you can go in and just take a Sysdig capture. So there's a tool called Sysdig, just to be confusing, and then Sysdig inspect is a way of visualizing that. You can just take it, much like you do with Wireshark. I want to start a capture now, I want to stop it later on, save that as a file. And surprisingly, they're saved as SCAPs, which is a system capture, rather than a PCAP, which is packet capture. So as a whole, this is the Sysdig Secure DevOps platform. These are all the different areas we cover. I've talked very heavily around secure. The other side of the platform, which I've not really touched on, and I'm not really going to touch on, is Sysdig Monitor. So this is where we kind of have a Prometheus compatible platform where you can monitor application health, cluster health. You can look into AWS workloads, cloud workloads, and so on. So that's quite powerful as well. But the focus for today really is one secure. I've kind of presented this slide just in different colors, so I'm not going to go over this again. That's Monitor, which I said I'm not going to touch too much on. We want to embed this into the workflow, and this is something that I talk a lot about, but our marketing team less so. I think my vision for Sysdig is a tool that you don't see, you don't use directly. Obviously, from an administrative perspective, you use it to configure and refine policies, but as a user, I actually don't want the visibility of that. What I want is something that's embedded into my existing tools. For those working in DevOps and DevSecOps, we know that you've got lots of tools already. Giving people another tool isn't going to solve anyone's problems. So actually, my view here is what I want to do is take the information from Sysdig and put it in your existing tools, whether that's within your CI/CD workflow. So as you're building something, I want to give you that Sysdig insight, Sysdig information directly as you're building it. I want to give you that response straight away. Later on, when you're doing kind of the SIM, the auditing, incident response, again, I want to embed it into there. I don't want to give you another dashboard. Just stick it in Splunk. Just stick it in Elasticsearch. So you can visualize things, you can correlate them across different activities. So that's really important kind of from my side of things. That's why I try and encourage our customers to do. Really, you don't want another dashboard, trust me. And then being able to plug into all these different things, so you've got that context, that activity, and so on and so forth. Massive wall chart, which is a horrible slide, but what I wanted to do is kind of highlight all the different areas we cover within the commercial platform. From a Falco side of things, you're kind of covering this runtime security. So the idea here is showing you all the additional things we do outside of Falco. Yes, you take a bunch of open source tools and you can build probably 80% of what we do in the commercial side of things. And it's always going to be that decision: do you invest in open source tooling, and you've got the overhead of engineering that, which is many organizations do, and that works absolutely fine, or you go a commercial tool where you don't have the engineering overhead, but obviously you're paying someone for it. So there's always that discussion of build versus buy, as we like to say. And I will leave that on. Just thank you everyone for your time. I feel like I've talked a little bit quickly, and hopefully the toddler distractions weren't too badly. And a bunch of links here for you. Like I said, I will share the slides so everyone can see these. I heard chat kind of pinging a little bit. I'm not sure if there was questions though.
I think there was only one. I'll have to scroll back up.
Yep.
It was about the Falco operator. That's retired now. Is that right?
Oh, cool. May well be. I might need to go back and update my slides. Thank you.
Okay.
And the comment about German Shepherd, if you've ever owned a German Shepherd, you'll understand that they're actually, as much as they look scary and they've got a bark, they are terrible guard dogs. I mean, genuinely, if I'm out with my wife and kids and someone scary comes along, she will bark and then hide behind me. They're terrible guard dogs. Genuinely, I think if someone actually broke into the house and I was home, she would hide under the bed. She's a completely different dog if I'm not around. If my wife is walking alone, she's actually quite a scary dog. But that's what you want. Yeah, she's a good dog. Magno, what tip would you give for someone just starting on Falco? I mean, I would, as I've kind of done here, I mean, genuinely, I know Falco and so on, but on this one, I've genuinely just set up Falco. I haven't customized the rules. I haven't triggered things here. I would recommend putting it in here with Falco Sidekick, just so you've got that visuals. You can see, again, if I look at the logs here, the logs aren't particularly easy to pass through and kind of get information out of them. But whereas if I switch across to the Falco Sidekick UI, it's much easier to kind of filter through the noise. You will get a lot of activity. If you're putting this into your environment and it's running existing workloads, you will get a bunch of stuff. I mean, probably. Most people do. And that's where you then start refining those rule sets. So I'd recommend installing Falco with Falco Sidekick to get access to the UI. Have a look at the default rules. Start working out how you can put exceptions into the rules. I don't know why I flipped back to that. I've got nothing to show there. Have a look at the exception process of the rules. I know my camera's died. It'll come back in a second. And then you can start filtering those down. The community is fantastic. So they've got the Falco group. I think I always get this confused because there's the Kubernetes Slack and there's the CNCF Slack. I believe the Falco community is in the Kubernetes Slack. Thank you, Magno. Yep. Great bunch of people. Pop, my colleague over in the US, very, very active, very, very helpful for the community. Leo and Lorenzo, some of the kind of the core contributors to that, again, super friendly. Lots of people around that community will help you out if you're just starting out. There's some good stuff on the documentation website as well. We are looking at building on the Sysdig side of things. We're looking at hopefully putting out some training, kind of getting started training into one-on-one training. So look out for those as well. Michael, I can't hear you. I don't know if you're on mute.
I am on mute. Great presentation, Chris. Well done. It was a family effort.
Yeah, and absolutely. I never thought the Go icon looked like a Pokemon, but absolutely it does.
Indeed. What are your suggestions with the books, the giveaways?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, I guess we could either do a random selection or whoever's noisiest in the chat.
There is a small there is a small caveat. I can only ship to the UK, so apologies. Your choice, Chris.
So you know what? I think Magno was contributing some good questions and some good information on stuff. So that'd be cool. And as well, I pointed out, there is a book coming out. So I think it's Leo and Lorenzo are working on a Falco cookbook. So check them out on Twitter. It's available for pre-order. If we come back and give a follow-up visit, I'm sure we can get. I'm sure I can manage to get some free copies for the community as well. But that should be quite good.